Live.
Well, hello, and welcome to the Waking Up Spiritually podcast. I'm Wendy Rose Williams, and my website is wendyrosewilliams.com. And I have the privilege of being a past life adventure guide, and I help people release energy that no longer serves them. Things like pain, anxiety, depression, and just unsticking that creativity too. I love working with first time authors, for example. And we're so happy that you're here with us today. Our website is wakingupspiritually.com, and you can see and hear the archive of all past programs there. Or you can join us live on Facebook the second and fourth Sundays at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, via the Waking Up Spiritually Facebook group. So I'd like to introduce Gregg Kirk, and he's going to introduce today's topic.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gregg Kirk. You can meet me online at greggkirk.com. That's spelled GREGGKIRK.com. I'm an energy worker, and I have been primarily working with patients of Lyme disease through herbal treatments and energy healing sessions. I've begun running online group healing circles for more than a year now, and we've begun doing in-person fire circles, generally in the New England area. But we'll hopefully be taking them elsewhere and having some great magical experiences there. So if you're interested in any of these things, you can go to greggkirk.com, reach out to me. You can request an appointment, or you can click on the events button and see when an event might be coming up that you might be interested in. So Wendy and I are very excited about this next topic we'll be discussing today, which is our favorite books. So let me pull this up here. There we go. So those of you watching this through video or live right now, you can see this is our most impactful spiritual books. So let me move right along, and we're going to go right into Wendy's favorite books.
I'll tell you, this was an incredible struggle to get it down to my top 10.
Right.
And this topic just came up spontaneously during our last podcast. And we both were talking about Journey of Souls by Michael Newton and Many Lives, Many Masters by Dr. Brian Weiss, and just how those had been so helpful to both Gregg and I. And that's what led to this topic. So Journey of Souls, for those of you who are not familiar, it is Dr. Michael Newton's wonderful best cases, most interesting client stories from a 30+ year career. And he then excerpted and just had these wonderful documentation of what people experience between lives, what people experience when they go home. That sort of just really profound information that many of us have dreams about and just wonder, can it really be true? So to see all those client case studies of past life regressions and life between lives was very, very moving for me. And it was an important part of my wake-up call. Many Lives, Many Masters, equally just a wake-up call in so many ways. And I then had the privilege to go train with Dr. Brian Weiss for past life regression. So, and that was just a very, very moving week at the Omega Center in Rhinebeck, New York, in upstate New York. And Gregg's also been there too, and has talked about being there multiple times and having led some groups there. Another book that really was a wonderful change for me and just explained so much that had been swirling around me that I'd been trying to understand and figure out was Dolores Cannon's book, The 3 Waves of Volunteers and the New Earth. And when I found this book about 8 or 10 years ago, I was really, really grateful for it. And personally, I believe we're all volunteers in the sense that we choose to take a life and to physically incarnate, whether it's on Earth, whether it's on another planet, whether it's in another dimension. But Dolores Cannon's work is amazing. And she wrote 20 books in her lifetime. So just mentioning and calling out that one, because that one was just really a shifter for me. If you like first person accounts of past life studies, Portrait of a Past Life Skeptic is amazing because Robert Snow is a police captain who thought past lives was a bunch of nonsense and really essentially had his first session on a dare because the police psychologist wouldn't stop referring him to go have this session and was just really, really after him. So he went to disprove it, which is quite interesting because Brian Weiss and Dr. Newton were also complete skeptics and were just more classically trained and just did not think that this was possible. But this was years ago. This was decades ago. So they're bravely stepping out and sharing what they had learned and writing these books made it a lot easier for those of us who came along and then read and were able to really think through what they had found. Same thing with How to Raise Your Vibration by Sabrina Reber. It's written and done as a spiral bound notebook so that you can go into different chapters more separately, or you can read it from start to finish. And I found it at the exact right moment when I needed to read it. If you're experiencing that serendipity, those synchronicities, and a book title keeps getting mentioned to you, or you keep hearing about it, or it just literally falls off your bookshelf, you haven't read it or haven't read it in years, just pay some attention. Because guess what? This is your own subconscious. This is your own guide. This is the universe trying to get your attention and say, hey, there's something here to help you at this moment in time. So How to Raise Your Vibration came along for me just at the right time. I think it was back in 2012 or so that I first read it and so appreciated it. Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's journey into the afterlife by Dr. Eben Alexander is another one of those game changers because it's considered one of the most amazing, well-documented near-death experience cases. And for it to have been written by a physician, a neurosurgeon, who really did not believe that there was necessarily heaven or that we could incarnate more than once, didn't necessarily believe in the soul. For him to have this incredible life-altering event, this near-death experience where he was not expected to live because of the incredible case of, I believe it was meningitis that he contracted and what happened with his brain and with his body. So it's a pretty amazing book to read because, like a good scientist, it's his proof of heaven and what he learned that he couldn't have known any other way except via the near-death experience. For instance, learning about an older sister who had passed on before he was born that was not spoken of, and to reunite with her during that. And Dr. Alexander also bravely stepped out and went on television, went on Oprah. I'm sure just faced a lot of skepticism and a lot of stepping into the fire, so to speak. When you have such a belief system change, it can be really rough. So I appreciate what he did in really speaking out publicly and the book tour that he went on. I really enjoyed meeting him in person when he came out to Seattle on his book tour. You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay is just the neatest little resource guide. And it's not a typical read in the sense that you read it from cover to cover, but it's a reference book. And you can simply look up. I use it all the time for clients more than I do for myself, but I use it for myself too. Whereas if you're having a physical problem, pain, disease, something is just not right, you can look up, for instance, I just opened randomly to the page with kidney problems. And Louise talks about, she believes the emotional component of that can be criticism, disappointment, failure, shame, reacting like a little kid. And she then wrote a series of affirmations for each of these issues. And that one, for example, is divine right action is always taking place in my life. Only good comes from each experience. It is safe to grow up. So that's an interesting one. So as I said, that book is always on my desk to assist clients or to look up something for myself and just see, does it resonate for you? You know, what thinking does it lead you to be able to resolve something? The Emotion Code, how to release your trapped emotions for abundant health, love, and happiness by Dr. Bradley Nelson, who's an energetic chiropractor. That one must be one of the books that I refer clients to the most often. I learned how to muscle test from it. It also gets into tapping and how you can release those trapped emotions, because the concept is emotions can get trapped in our body at any point in time. And when we don't know how to release them in a healthy way, that over time is going to lead to pain, to disease, to dysfunction in our body. And I also learned about the heart wall in that book. And at certain points, that those issues can just come up where we're really, really hurt. And we just put up a heart wall to protect ourselves. And we don't realize it. And that's appropriate at the time. It's the best we can do. But then we also learn how to release that. Frequency, The Power of Personal Vibration by Penny Pierce. That one was absolutely a game changer for me to really understand our thoughts create our reality. And Waking Up in 5D, A Practical Guide to Multidimensional Transformation by Maureen St. Germain. Maureen St. Germain, like Penny Pierce, is a spiritual teacher. And I met Maureen at the Wisdom Soup Summit when we were both speaking. And I just really was drawn to her. I loved what she had to say, and I jumped straight into one of her books. And Waking Up in 5D was the first book that explained to me why certain things were just physically disappearing. And I'd have them near me when I was meditating, but it was in the period of time when I was really raising my vibration. And I would come back to my body and think, oh my gosh, that was a really deep meditation. I really enjoyed that. And I couldn't find whatever I'd had near me. I'm like, well, where did my glasses go? Where did my keys go? Did these things get like knocked off the bed? What's going on? So you've got to read the book to read her explanation of what might be going on with that. Because I'd never had trouble holding on to physical things like that before, as when I went through that shift. So really, really amazing, amazing book. So any comments on that, Gregg? I know you've read Journey of Souls and Many Lives, Many Masters. Have you read any of the others?
I've read several of Dolores Cannon's books and the Emotion Code.
Okay.
So, and that I think all those Many Lives, Many Masters, anything by Dolores Cannon, Louise Hay's You Can Heal Your Life. Those are monumental books in anybody's life who is on a healing journey, either whether you're trying to heal yourself or you're trying to become a healer. These are pivotal books to read.
Yes. And kudos to Louise Hay, because she couldn't get her first book published. And she then created Hay House Publishing, which is it's grown into over the years, just a powerhouse. It's the biggest metaphysical publishing house in the United States at this point, and publishes, yes, just such a trailblazer. And Louise lived such a long and amazing life, and just had really overcome a lot. So really inspirational woman.
Yes. Okay. So my top 10, well, first one, Many Lives, Many Masters, right out of the block. Actually, before I really get started, I just want to tell a quick story about, I was a part of, I still am loosely a part of this. There's a local healing group here in town. We get together on a monthly basis. And we did this exercise several years ago where there were a lot of people, well, it was all healers. So one of the one of the people leading the group lunch was just mention, what books had the biggest impact on your lives. And, of course, we were all rattling off books very similar to what Wendy and I had put together here. But somebody um, mentioned a book that had a big impact on my life, not directly to healing, but it was The Lord of the Rings. She mentioned, she's a Reiki healer, and she said, The Lord of the Rings um, put it in my mind that magic was possible. Even though it was a book of fiction, it really opened my eyes to magical things. And I was like, you know what? It did. I was 15 and I was not reading many books when I was that age. And that's my 15th birthday. On November 15th, I got the trilogy, and it changed my life. It made me become a writer, and a lot of the concepts in Lord of the Rings, when it comes to astral work and so forth, I've actually used some of these magical concepts in envisioning things like weapons or protection or things like that. So I just wanted to tip of the hat to J.R.R. Tolkien for that book. And then the other thing that I mentioned that the leader of the group kind of gave me a backhanded compliment and said, "Well played, Gregg," because she thought I was plugging. But I mentioned my own book because the request was, what books had the biggest impact on your life. Writing my own book had a big impact on my life. Wendy, I'm sure you would agree.
Absolutely. I went back and forth. Do I include my own books or not? Because
Right.
nothing changes your life more than the process of writing your own book.
Right. So I mentioned it in that group. I'd just like to mention it here too, that, obviously Wendy and I have both written books. I'm working on a second one, and they have had big impacts in our lives as well. But anyway, back to books that other people wrote that had an impact on our lives. The first one I think I ever wrote that opened my eyes to just alternate realities and past lives and things like that was Brian Weiss's Many Lives, Many Masters, followed quickly by Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe. And then years later, I read all his books as well. So he's like Dolores Cannon in that he's written multiple books. They're all about out of body experiences. So this and coming from the point of view of somebody who was not looking, he was a skeptic as well. He was not looking for these things, these experiences, and they just kind of happened to him. And the experiences he had of being able to take his consciousness out of his body and moving it around, first just moving it around in places on Earth, but then moving beyond the Earth, beyond the planes, and just into it's just like science fiction. It's incredible. And he's got an analytical mind. He documents all this stuff. He tells you, gives you instructions on how to do it yourself. He created the Monroe Institute, where now people do out of body experiences and document them and research them. I can't remember where they're located. I think it's Virginia or something, but just huge impact on healing in the spiritual world. Any book by Robert Monroe is amazing, but to me, the most amazing one was after reading Journeys Out of the Body and then Far Journeys, which kind of followed in the line of, his experiences with out of body experiences. It went way beyond belief stretching in Ultimate Journeys, where his wife passed, and then ultimately he did too. He didn't write after he passed, but there's kind of some open questions at the end of that book. But anyway, just fantastic stuff. Moving along, the Magdalene manuscript by Tom Kenyon really triggered me into this idea that I had a life as a Magdalene, which was a group of people who were in tune with Isis. This was thousands of years ago, prior to Jesus being born. The most famous Magdalene is Mary Magdalene that we know of from the Bible, but the Magdalenes were around before her, and they, basically were a group of people who, it was more than a religion. It was really a way of a life of honoring the divine feminine through Isis and through temples. They're just phenomenal. Tom Kenyon's book on that really opened my eyes to that. And so kudos to him. He gives a lot. I believe it's in that book that he talks about sacred union, Kundalini rising, and gives you instructions on how to
He
raise your
does.
Kundalini. So
It's one of my favorite books too. And you can also look up, there's a documentary made regarding his life. I believe it's called Song of New Earth. And I
yes.
had the privilege of being there in person the night it debuted in Seattle, and I met he and his wife.
Oh, fantastic.
So it's an amazing book.
It is, and a great film too. So the book that probably had the biggest, the one that I go back to the most often, the one that has really changed my belief system is the Law of One series, The Raw Material, by a group of people who channeled this group consciousness known as Ra. That, lo and behold, there's a sun god that was worshipped in Egypt. That is actually, this is Ra. So it's these beings, and they came back in the mid '80s to say, we're not gods. We're here. We were misunderstood. We're here to help you. And basically, it's the best information I've ever read that it helps explains man's role in the universe, the Earth, the history of the Earth. It goes back hundreds of thousands of years. What's going on now, and again, belief pushing stuff that even pushed the beliefs of the people who were channeling them. Because one of them, Don Elkins, was actually a ufologist, somebody who was researching UFOs. And one of the questions that he asks early on is, he asks the raw beings, so these UFOs that we see in the sky, whose are they? And the information shocked the channelers so much that they said, we don't believe you. In fact, it's making us question now everything that you've told us. And the raw being said, we have no reason to give you false information. But anyway, what the raw beings said were a majority of the UFOs you see in the sky are by humans' creation, which shocked them back in the 80s.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so that was, anyway. But so great book if you're looking for something. I will put it next to the Bible. I will put it next to any holy books, which in fact they weigh in on. They talk about the accuracy of some of the holy books, not with any judgment, because the raw beings are not about judgment. They're all about giving you truth. So fantastic stuff. Shortly after reading those books, I was almost invited to read the books Anna, Grandmother of Jesus, and Anna, Voice of the Magdalens. Again, both of these books have a special place in my heart because I had a past life during the time when Jesus was alive, and I couldn't put my finger on it. I just had this feeling of familiarity. Both of these books, the first one written solely by Claire Hartsong, and then the second book was a collaboration by Claire Hartsong and Catherine Ann Clement, who I had the pleasure of meeting and becoming friends with, not good friends, but we're in touch every now and then. The idea being that this was channeled information, and it was channeled in a way that's different than, for instance, like the raw beings actually came in and spoke through. I can't remember her first name. Ruckert is her last name. Carla Ruckert, that's her name. She was the channel. So they did these special things where a being started speaking through her. With Claire Hartsong, and ultimately with Claire and Catherine Ann Clement, and I believe a third channeler, they literally experienced the lives of some of the people who are mentioned in the Bible. So this is basically, they go back to the time before Christ was born, during Christ's life when he was growing up, the so-called forgotten years, from 0 to 30. And then, after the crucifixion, what happened with the Holy Family and all of their friends and relatives. A lot of them were hunted down after the crucifixion. Just going into details about that, but going through it through the eyes of the people who were in those lives. So the way it was just
first person point of view.
Yeah, it was. They literally experienced it. So in a lot of cases, it was disruptive, and it was traumatizing, because the way it was described, like they would be on a battlefield and they could smell the smoke. they could hear the cries, and they were in. So it was a type of channeling I'd not heard of prior to that. So that was really fascinating. Both books, highly recommend. And it really, honestly, it goes beyond. Well, I mean, if you like the Da Vinci Code, this is, to me, is like the real Da Vinci Code, especially the second book. It goes into some of the subjects, but I think it explains it in a lot better way. So moving on, the Dolores Cannon book that I liked the most were the Convoluted Universe series. So basically, Dolores Cannon was a hypnotist from the school of Brian Weiss, I believe. Maybe you can correct me on that, Wendy.
She was separate. There wasn't an association other than Dolores Cannon, Dr. Brian Weiss, and Dr. Michael Newton are the three biggest hypnotherapists in the US, but three different paths.
Yeah. Okay, but I thought she'd been trained similarly or something like that, but where she was doing things similar to Brian Weiss, but then she took it a step further, like she developed her own style.
I'm not aware of that.
Whatever the case, she her stuff got really. So what I liked about Weiss's stuff is it made me understand things like going into a past life and healing trauma, which that concept I'd not known before, Brian Weiss. And Dolores Cannon was doing a lot of that, but then
quantum healing hypnotherapy, that was what I liked about it so much. Yeah. And she also, like Elkins, was a ufologist, so she began, just through all these client experiences, she began speaking at the conventions.
Yes, yeah. So she started channeling. So she was having these experiences where they were doing the typical, all right, let's heal this trauma from a past life, but then the oversoul would start stepping in and saying, let's look at the continuum of lives, or sometimes, a master, a so-called master would come in,
yes,
and say, let me give you some information about the human race, or just stuff off the charts, way beyond just let's heal this person's trauma. Let's talk about the role of humanity on Earth right now, and that kind of stuff. So really fascinating. Another set of books that I use as kind of like a handbook are both of Michael Singer's books. The Untethered Soul, which is a very quick read, very good at releasing what he calls thorns, that may be stuck, emotional thorns that may be stuck in your chakras or your energy body, and how to release them. And then the Surrender Experiment, which I talked about in another episode, where basically he spent several years just not saying no to any experiences in his life, and letting his life take him where it was meant to without his interference. Fascinating stuff.
That takes a lot of courage. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I'm again, it's a book I recommend to people, especially when I see them kind of going through a life experience or a healing experience where they're kind of maybe mentally becoming their own worst enemy or blocking their own healing or something like that. I'll recommend that to people. Or honestly, I recommend it to anybody, because it's just he started down a path where he kind of set this ideal in his life of how he wanted to live, which was just literally building a cabin in the woods of Florida and meditating and being by himself and just being a spiritual like hermit. And he made some headway there, but then after he built that place, he just stopped saying no to things, and then he was just taken off into unbelievable territory where he met world gurus, and he started several companies, and just incredible. Anyway, moving on, one of the books that had a big impact on me, kind of like the scientific explanation of our energy and our consciousness and how that impacts our lives, is Dr. David Hawkins' Power versus Force. And we talked about this in our last episode when we were talking about the Great Awakening. Dr. Hawkins created something called the map of human consciousness, which I refer to and think about every day, literally, where he used muscle testing to devise the system to show what emotions, and where they vibrate, and how that affects your vibrating frequency. So things like shame and guilt, are way down on the scale, but things like love and wisdom and caring and empathy, these are way higher on the map of human consciousness. And obviously it's an ideal to strive for, but he went so far as to gauging the consciousness of the earth and found that in 1992 it went from being a low vibration of like 150 something up to 200, which was acceptance. And that, the consciousness of human nature was constantly going up, not dramatically, but higher. We've moved out of our force phase, and now we're into our power phase, which is very, very cool. And then the final book I just wanted to mention is a book that came to me through supernatural means, Falling Upward by Richard Rohr. I was sitting in Brazil, seeing a healer named John of God, and with a friend of mine who hears voices, not because he's crazy, but because he's able to hear some higher level beings. And I was
Clairaudient,
and
which is a psychic ability like clairvoyance, that clear
Right.
seeing. We can also have that clear hearing, that connection with the divine. Again, not to be confused with a mental illness.
Right. So yeah, he's definitely not mentally ill. So he and I were in the middle of a conversation, and he put his hand up and said, "Hold on, I'm being told you need to read the book Falling Upward." I said, "Okay." And then we kept talking, and then he said, "Oh, well, I'm being told you need to know the author's name. It's Richard Rohr." I said, "Okay." And then he started to put his hand up a third time, and then he went into the house and he scribbled down Richard Rohr Falling Upward, and he just handed it to me. He said, "I need to hand this to you." So anyway, while we were doing research for this episode, I grabbed my book, Falling Upwards, and lo and behold, I have the paper that he gave me.
Oh, you have the note where he actually wrote down for you to get that book?
Yes. So I was like, I forgot that that it was just a great surprise. But tucked in that, he had written another book. So I'm going to talk about later, called the Magus of Strovolos. So that has been, so I just want to say, during the research of this episode, I've got another book to add. I know we're supposed to keep it to 10, and I'm sorry, but I had to add this one because I'll talk about it later. It's an amazing book. So anyway, Wendy, is there anything you'd like to add before we go into doing a drill down?
Yes, I'd just like to mention that in Dolores Cannon's 20 titles, she also wrote 2 accounts of lifetimes in the biblical time. So it's interesting how that's such a strong theme. And she wrote Jesus and the Essene, and I forget the title of the other one, but they were just really, really well done. I almost had those on my list also.
Yeah, I read one of them. I don't remember what it was, but it was about a young boy who had been taught by Jesus, who lived in the Essene. It might have been the Jesus and the Essenes. I think it was
in that
one.
Community. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's jump into a little bit more detail on the emotion code, how to release your trapped emotions for abundant health, love, and happiness. And the author, as I mentioned, is Dr. Bradley Nelson, who is an energetic chiropractor. And the premise of this book, to boil down it to its essence, is it helps you learn how you can release emotionally charged events from the past that are now stuck in your body, which can cause pain, both physical and emotional pain, as well as malfunction and eventually disease. So, Gregg, I don't know if that comes up in all your work with Lyme patients, but if this seems pertinent at all, because that is such a long-term devastating disease that Western medicine really struggles to help with. So that's one that immediately comes to mind here, as well as cancer comes to mind.
Right.
And another one of Dr. Nelson's premise is that trapped emotional energies can create a heart wall, as I mentioned earlier, and that impacts your ability to give love and to receive love. Because if we've got that wounding and we've put up a wall, particularly one around our heart, and he gets in and describes how that heart wall can be energetically measured as being up to 5 miles in depth, in distance. So, oh my goodness, wouldn't we all need to go off and live in Florida in the cabin by ourselves, or go be Thoreau, having the on Walden Pond experience. And I'm not saying those were wounded individuals. I think those two men were both doing it to really learn who they were at their core and to up level. I think they were doing beautiful, beautiful work.
Right.
But this really resonated for me because I hadn't heard of the concept of a heart wall before. And I found this book during the time that I was working with my first spiritual teacher. And I had a lot of work to do in this area to just really feel safe, to know that I'm always loved, I'm always protected. Because guess what? That comes from me. That's something I do for myself, as well as I also feel that from my higher self, from my soul. I feel that from the universe, from the divine, from my guides, etc. But as I was working with the spiritual teacher, she was, I think, as surprised as I was. And she said, "Oh my goodness, Wendy, we really need to help you drop this heart wall because energetically, I was holding the heart wall for humanity," which is kind of mind blowing. And it's like, oh my goodness, let's see what we can do to get out of this fear place. And the antidote to fear, as we know, is love. It's not courage. Courage is the antidote to cowardice. But when we can just look at things at their basic level and say, why am I feeling fear? And what is this? What is this trapped emotion? Is this what's stuck in my heart? Is this just like coming down from my head and my brain? Am I too much in my left brain? Am I too much in my ego? That can be, feeding into this big heart wall where we're keeping people at a distance, we're keeping experiences at a distance. So the opposite of Michael Singer just saying yes, or there's a couple movies out about that recently, The Day of Yes, and just saying yes. Usually it's shown as parents and kids, but it can be a broader context too. And the emotion code also gets into how to powerfully eliminate your emotional baggage. And that's a really big deal because guess what? We've all got it and no one else can fix it for us or take it away or, save us from ourselves. Yes, certainly we can work with loving friends and family, or we might be choosing to work with a healer or a spiritual teacher or a therapist or whoever, but they're simply helping you hold space to do your own work because you've got to be willing to do your own work, which is why I think Gregg and I always have so much fun when we do sessions together, the two of us. And when I contact him and say, hey, I really got something going on here and I want to shift it. I want to be able to eliminate it. I want to be able to move up from it. And because Gregg's so clairvoyant, he's usually seeing it and I'm really clairaudient. So I'm hearing what's going on. So it's really fun. It's like we're going through the book together and he's seeing it and I'm hearing it read aloud to me. So it's just a neat way to know. And muscle testing, as I mentioned, was something else I learned in the emotion code. And it was fantastic for me because when I first learned that from the emotion code, I learned how to muscle test standing and to use my body as a pendulum. And I had frozen hips at that time, which is very painful, and was having a lot of mobility problems, a lot of trouble walking and moving. And I'm sure that's why this book landed in my lap, and why I learned how to muscle test to speak with my higher self and speak with my guides and get those clear yes or no answers. And it unlocked my hips over time because of that swaying back and forth, and I got that danged energy moving. So I was very, very grateful for that. And muscle testing, we've talked about several times before, but the purpose of it is to know your own truth, because our bodies are really wise. So it's just being able to get that information to come forward. Okay,
Great.
any comments on that, Greg, or are we ready for the next slide?
Yeah, I think we're ready. I enjoyed the book as well. Love the, well, yeah, I don't really have anything to add. You did a great job. So as I mentioned, a big book series for me was The Law of One. I don't remember how it came into my life, to be honest with you. It was just one of those things where a lot of people were talking about it, I think. And it caught me off guard. I had no idea anybody had done this type of research. Literally just going to a higher source and getting information, asking really deep questions that have affected humanity for thousands of years and getting answers on it. You know, what's the meaning of life? Things like that. Yeah, so as I call it, one of the most important compilations of information from recent history. It's scientifically channeled by a trio of investigators. For those of you who can see over on in the lower right hand corner, you've got Don Elkins here measuring how far away Carla Ruckert's head is from some of the. They have a candle. They've got a chalice with They've got some incense. Like, they were given all of this information by the raw beings on how to, because they noticed that sometimes the information, so it was like tweaking a radio antenna or something to get the best channel.
Tuning that dial.
Yeah, exactly. And the raw beings would say, no, move her, farther away by 2 feet, and then change her angle by 10 degrees. Literally, that kind of information was coming in. Just unbelievable stuff. So all the information either informs, correlates, or corrects information from all the holy books, historical accounts of Egypt, explanations of UFOs, major Earth cycles, and the meaning of life. I mean, what more could you ask for, really? The only thing about the book that is tough going is the way the raw beings speak. So they're trying to be so accurate, and they're not human. So they don't use the words, for instance, people. They call it mind, body, spirit complexes. So every time they refer to a person, they'll say that mind, body, spirit complex that you call Hitler is,
So you have to learn, like, it's like learning to read Shakespeare. I mean, Shakespeare is amazing and meaningful, but it's not easy to pick up your first Shakespeare play and just go on through it. Right.
So friends, anybody who I've referred this, I've warned them about that. And some people had just, it kept them from really enjoying it. But other people have just torn through it like I have, and it goes into five books, and it's actually kind of sad at the end, because Don Elkins ends up committing suicide because of a misstep he makes. They started receiving something called negative greeting, meaning because the information was coming in was the truth, there was a negative being, a group of them, who did not want this information to make it to
disruptors.
Yes. And Don made a misstep, and he ended up he lost his mind. He committed suicide. So that's a tragic ending. Carla Ruckert and the other guy, McCarty's, they're still alive, I believe. Well, the other thing is Carla received negative greeting herself and just was crippled from doing these channelings. So she was like bedridden for a good deal of her life after this. So, I mean, talk about the sacrifice that these 3 people gave. And and for the most part, the information came out, it was free for a while. So I don't, the books, you can buy them on Amazon and elsewhere. I think the proceeds go to some sort of foundation that they put together to to get this information out to the right people who want it. But anyway, it's monumental stuff. Highly, highly recommend. So that's all I need to say about that. Is there anything you want to add, Wendy?
No, that's fantastic. I have not read it. I've heard it referred to, and I know it's just so well respected. So thank you for that summary.
Mhm. Okay.
Frequency, The Power of Personal Vibration by Penny Pierce. And Penny is a long-term spiritual teacher, and she helped me embrace that our spirit, our thoughts, our emotions, our body are all made of energy. And I'll be honest, that just wasn't on my radar. I wouldn't have related to that. I didn't know that until about 12 years ago. And she really lays out a wonderful case of the fact that everything is vibrating and our personal vibration shapes our reality. And she tells it like it is when she talks about mankind having the ability to manifest more powerfully and quickly than ever before. But because the universe doesn't understand negatives, if you're in this place and you get stuck in what's called stinking thinking of, oh my gosh, every time I try to take the dog for a walk, it always rains. And how am I ever going to enjoy a walk with the dog? And oh, now I can't find my umbrella. And just trying to make up a silly everyday example here. Well, guess what? It really is going to be like that. Whereas I do live in a part of the country where it does rain a lot. And guess what? I've got a puppy and we need to get out there. So I just choose every day to say, hey, we're going to put on our rain gear and we're just going to go out there and have a good time. And we're going to choose when we're going to go out. And interestingly, a lot of times it's either not raining that hard or the sun actually comes out. Or just something great happens out of that experience. Or I'll just get to the park and go, well, hey, I get to park anywhere I want because it is raining and no one else is here. But it's just being careful of what your thought patterns are, because they really do create your reality. And if you find yourself, just slipping into that negativity, which we can all do from time to time, because we're tired or we're just having a challenging day, you can just take a breath and just say, okay, cancel, clear, delete, just like on the computer, and let go of that stinking thinking and just have some sense of humor about it and just let it go. And Penny Pierce talks about finding your home frequency, your highest personal vibration, allowing you to maximize your clarity, minimize your struggle, and discover new talents and abilities, and really managing your energy state so that you can stay on track with your destiny and live your life purpose. Because doesn't that light up most of us? When Gregg was bringing up the power of raw and those really big questions, that is one of the top questions I hear from clients during session is, gee, do you think I could find out my life purpose and why I'm here? So when they're able to really get clarity on that and understand more about their personal vibration and their frequency, it makes life a lot more fun. There's a lot more flow to it. There's a lot more ease to it, simply from having shifted some perspective. So I see it as a really, really powerful energy shift or perspective in how you're looking at things. So that's what I wanted to say about frequency.
Fantastic. Let's move along to, I spent a good deal of time talking about this, but Anna, Grandmother of Jesus, it's the actually companion book to Anna, Voice of the Magdalens is the book I'm talking about. It's the companion piece to Anna, Grandmother of Jesus, where all the information was channeled from the actual consciousnesses, as I mentioned, basically from the souls who are written about the book, who happen to be some of the major figures in the New Testament of the Bible. So that's, if that's something that turns you on, you're in for a fun ride and some surprises. The second book, as I said, it goes into, well, first of all, it was channeled by both Claire Hartsong and Catherine and Clement. And the way that came about is just supernatural in and of itself. I believe Claire Hartsong was thinking about writing a second book, but had some health setbacks and wasn't really going to do it. And then two people came into her life and just started doing the channeling with her like spontaneously. It was not foreseen, and it just happened, and it was just unbelievable. They talk about during the creation of the book, like these beings. I mean, we're talking about Lazarus, the one who was raised, from the dead, coming through. And other people, cousins of Jesus and so forth, who would come in, and they would wake up and be in, Catherine Ann Clement's body or Claire Hartsong's body. And then they started doing this thing where they would go to the bathroom because they didn't have toilet paper 2,000 years ago. So they were telling each other on the other side, you got to have this human experience. Go in, go to the bathroom and use this toilet paper. It's pretty cool. So that's
great.
Yeah. So that was happening offline. They were just getting, it's funny because they've been so disembodied for so many years. They when they came through, they were having this spiritual bodies having this human experience. It's really, really funny. But it is so well documented, and they literally track the activities and the genetic line of Jesus and all of his relatives. And in the back of the book, it's just it's very well documented and researched, and it's incredible information about the life of Jesus and his family. And like I said, it goes well beyond the Da Vinci Code. A lot of surprises at the end, a lot of where it explains Da Vinci Code type stuff. And so I won't spoil the ending for you, but it's if they made a movie about this, it would be more exciting, I believe, than the Da Vinci Code. But very, very cool. Have you read either of these books?
I have not, and I'm absolutely going to. This is fantastic.
Yeah, very cool. Okay.
Waking Up in 5D, A Practical Guide to Multidimensional Transformation by spiritual teacher Maureen St. Germain is really, really an incredible book, because she takes concepts that are very esoteric, and she explains them so well, just through first-person accounts, through stories and experiences that our clients have had, and how we move from that polarized mindset of 3D to get to the joy and love of the fifth spiritual dimension is a big deal. And she also explains a lot of ways how to develop your higher self, your soul connection, so you can more just understand and relate to that best part of you. And also using meditation to open to the higher frequencies, and be able to hold on to your glasses and your keys at the same time. And to consciously choose love, the governing force of 5D, and to release fear. And Maureen's also got a really neat story in it where she takes the example of having a parallel life, because if you believe that we reincarnate and can choose to reincarnate into more than one body at the same time, putting aside quantum physics where it's all happening at the same time, but putting that aside, she actually describes an experience with someone who steals from her. This person takes money. She goes through this whole series of events, and she set it up for herself to master forgiveness and to really learn to do that and to master self-forgiveness. Because guess what? That other individual turns out to be her own parallel self.
Wow.
And think about it. Don't we steal from ourselves when we're not living our destiny, when we're not really being brave and going for it and just stepping out and doing those things that we want to do, we feel we should do, but we're holding ourselves back? But it's just a really, really interesting story, an example of how she discovered that this man that was stealing from her was part of her own soul and was a parallel life. So I thought that was just really mind blowing. And I personally, it really resonated for me. We all choose what to believe or say, oh, that's too far out there. I don't believe that could happen. We get to choose our beliefs, and I'm just presenting what I thought was an absolutely fascinating book. She also talks about the fairies a lot, which can be related to those missing items that turn up again in a different location. But what was actually happening for me was, as I was raising my vibration, I was moving the things immediately around me, which also explained why Midnight, my cat, was very upset by my meditations during that time period, because he would be going with me and he wasn't really enjoying the ride. So he wanted to do that on his own in his own way. And it was like, oh my gosh, just because I was like, laying on her, because I was laying next to her, whoa, we're doing this weird thing. And then he would, like I said, jump off the bed, and I'd be, okay, is that where my glasses went? Is that where my keys went? What's going on here? And it was because I had, then dropped back into 3D, because I hadn't quite learned how to integrate it all. And some things were missing in other dimensions temporarily, is what she theorizes. And honestly, it's the first thing that made sense to me. It was really, really interesting. So just a great book.
Wow. Great concepts. That's really, really, really cool. So I want to do this one quickly because I added a second. Wendy and I agreed to do 3 books. So I just wanted to say this book by Robert Monroe is my favorite. It's the Ultimate Journeys book. I mentioned it earlier. It's the last book that he wrote. His first-hand accounts of out-of-body experiences that happened beyond Earth in the lower astral planes. He illustrates the power of our belief systems and the fact that we take them with us in the afterlife, so that's a concept. I had always thought that when you died, the veil was removed and you kind of resorted to your spiritual, wise self, and you kind of looked back on your life and the mistakes you made and the adjustments you wanted to make, and you looked at it, beyond the veil. But what this sequence of books taught me was that the more lives you have on Earth, the more the veil can wipe your memory clean, and you can it doesn't do that. And you can take your belief systems with you. He described an experience where he was in this limbo state where people who didn't believe in God go. So, and these people would go to this state, and this one girl, he said, was a girl like in the 70s. She died in the 70s. She had bell bottoms on, and she looked around and said, "I knew it. There's no God. I knew it." And he was like, "Well, yeah, that's your belief. So this is what you're going to get." And he tried to talk to her.
We create our reality. We're right back there to frequency.
Exactly. So just fantastic. But there's a cryptic implication of Monroe's own life I have not heard anybody talk about, that he talks about these disembodied beings who come to the Earth as tourists, and one of them decides, I'm going to go down to the Earth and have a life and see what it's all about, because they're outside of time and space. They can do that, and it won't take, decades for them to see the results. It'll happen almost like in real time to them. So one of them stays back and one of them does. And he has these weird names for them, AA and BB. So BB goes down and does this. And the more he comes back, the more he forgets who he is. And, first incorporates as a woman and comes back and says, wow, I'll never do that again. Being a woman's hard. And then, had these other lives. And the more you understand some of these overlapping things that happen in these lives, it coincides with some of Robert Monroe's past lives that he had discovered. And nobody's ever said this, but I think BB is Robert Monroe. So I believe Robert Monroe got stuck in this like karmic wheel and recycling of lives, and he forgot who he was. So anyway.
Well, I think you can say that's true for a lot of humanity, but yeah. I believe that things have really, really changed in the last 5 to 10 to 20 years. And yes, we may have a set belief system when we die, and we don't just automatically go up to the light. Some individuals certainly do.
Right.
And I see real differences in client sessions of who's able to do that easily during the session and who has a harder time with it.
Right.
But we can always break free. We can always find a way to clear the clutter, and just turning inward and looking for that love and that peace and that joy. And we can break free of that karmic force and that karmic lessons and weight, and get on the dharmic path.
Right.
So I really believe that's true.
I agree. So I'm breaking the rules here at the end, but I just wanted to say one thing. Sorry, Wendy, but during the researching of this, I pulled out my book of Falling Upward, and I actually have the piece of paper that my friend wrote down when we were, sitting in Brazil, and I found it, Falling Upward by Richard Rohr. This is the actual paper. So I thought, wow, this is like an artifact I found. This is cool. Wait a minute, what's this other piece of paper? And he had written down some other book titles. Both of them written by a guy named Kyriakos Markides. And so I got the first one, called The Magus of Strovolos. And I just recommend it for anybody who is either a budding energy worker or even an expert at this point. It's just incredible. A real life account of somebody who was living in the island of Cyprus in the 1980s. He was doing magical work, magical healing work, bilocating. He would be alerted to, because he's on an island, there would be shipwrecks in action happening off the coast. He'd be asleep, and he would feel this disturbance, and he would send some of his energy to place hands on the steering wheel of these boats, and these people would see his spiritual hands. I mean, he was doing all these magical things. So he, the name is Daskalos. He describes his experiences in the worlds outside of our perceived reality, his healing practices that brought about miracles, supernatural experiences that stretched the imagination. He talks about, like, for instance, during this time, for those who were around during the 70s, you'll remember that the NASA created something called Skylab, and then they lost control of it in the early 80s, I believe. And it was tumbling down to Earth, and people were afraid it was going to break through the Earth's atmosphere and actually land in a populated area and cause a lot of casualties. So Daskalos decided, I'm going to send my consciousness up there. I'll try to fix it. Well, he went up there, and there was others around. There was others already doing it from Europe and the United States and so forth. But one of them was a flying saucer with some extraterrestrials in it. And they said, you guys back off. You're doing okay, but we got this under control. We're going to push Skylab down in an area. They pushed it down into the Australian outback. And, just so these are the kinds of experiences he had. He was very low key about it, not braggadocious at all. He, as he says, the advice that most healers who are masters say, your ego must be taken out of the picture. And just, if anything, it shows the possibilities of how far healing and just magical living can really take place, and really did, because it wasn't just him. He had a group of people around him who were learning from him, and there was healing masters all over the world that he consorted with. So I'm sure some of them are still alive today. Just anyway, so this book lit me on fire just last week.
That's fantastic.
So I highly recommend it. So thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time and interest. And Gregg, do we have any comments or questions in the Facebook group? If you want to look for.
Yeah, I've heard
those.
Some people have complained that when they're trying to join us on Facebook, they get bounced out. So that's more of a Facebook issue.
Okay.
But
Okay.
yeah.
Well, we'll let that be. So please do join us on the second and fourth Sunday of the month. And if that's not working, that's fine, certainly via the archives. And you can go to wakingupspiritually.com and find all the past episodes there. And would love to have your comments. If you'd love to hear more about a certain topic, please let us know. And Gregg's website is Gregg, G-R-E-G-G, Kirk, Kirk.com. And check out his book, The Gratitude Curve, because it is amazing. And my website is my full name, wendyrosewilliams.com. And please take a peek at my books there. I'm getting ready to release my third book, and I also have some short stories published in multi-author compilations. And you are welcome to request a complimentary 15-minute phone appointment with me via my website to plan a session together. So again, thank you so much, and a big happy birthday to Gregg, since his birthday's tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll see you all in a couple of weeks. Thank you, Wendy. Great episode. We'll see you all soon.
Bye now.